The Memphis Grizzlies lost a basketball game on Wednesday night. They lost to the Miami Heat in an uncharacteristically poor defensive performance. And don't get me wrong, we're going to get to that. But John Morant finally has an end game for his suspension. Yes, we can finally use the word suspension. He's met with Adam Silver. He's had a sit-down interview with Jalen Rose. John Morant is the franchise player, the future of the Memphis Grizzlies. Hopefully we can talk about him on the court soon. We're going to talk about the latest news off of it next here on Locked On Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. Hello. Thank you so much for joining me here on another episode of Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host for this episode, Joe Mullinax of Bluff City Media, Grizzlies columnist over at Bluff City Media, also write for SB Nation as well as Fansided. Much appreciated wherever you're checking us out, however you're getting your podcasts. Of course, Locked On Grizzlies, a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team each and every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can also check us out over on YouTube. Rate, review, subscribe, like, comment, all those fun things. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Ultimate Basketball GM. Ever dreamed of becoming an NBA GM and managing your basketball franchise? Then this game is definitely for you. To download the game, just visit ultimatebasketballgm.com or look it up on the app stores. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo Locked On, all caps, in the game. Flying solo on this episode, DeMichael Cole will be joining me for our Friday episode. We'll do a dynamic duo show to close out the week, but he was alone on Wednesday's show. Here I am on a Thursday, and a major news dump in terms of John Morant and actual direction in terms of when his return will be coming for the Memphis Grizzlies. Morant went to New York, met with Adam Silver, had an interview with Jalen Rose of ESPN. We now know that the suspension, it is finally being called a suspension, has been levied by the NBA, technically not by the organization itself, the Memphis Grizzlies, but the time away that Ja has taken from the Grizzlies will count toward the suspension. So it's been an 8-game suspension. That's been the official ruling from Adam Silver in the NBA. I believe it was Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN that had that first. And the 6 games, including the Miami Heat game that just happened on Wednesday night, the 6 games that preceded that meeting, or at least it was 5 and then the 6th against the Heat, they count. So it's retroactive. So that means Ja is out for San Antonio on Friday. That means Ja is out for Golden State on Saturday. Morant is eligible to return to the Grizzlies on Monday, March 20th. The Grizzlies have a game against the Dallas Mavericks that night, but it's important to point out that that is the first day that Morant is allowed back in the Grizzlies facility. So Morant almost certainly, I believe Taylor Jenkins eliminated the possibility completely because obviously Ja needs to get back into basketball. I would imagine we will see Ja in one of the 2 Houston Rocket games Wednesday or Friday of next week. That would be my guess when we see Ja Morant return, one of those 2. Hopefully the Wednesday game, I would imagine, for both the Grizzlies and Morant, but potentially that Friday if he needs a couple more days after a couple weeks off to get back into the swing. A lot to unpack here. First and foremost, I will always, when it comes to this topic, lead off with hoping that Ja Morant is well. Right. I'm not going to get into trivializing mental health. There are a lot of people getting off their memes and their jokes on social media. And I just struggle with when that's okay. Right. When is that an okay thing to do? When are we going to stop trying to define what okay mental health issues are? What okay mental illness is in this year 2023? Because John Morant has talked about this multiple times. DeMichael Cole has talked about it on this show. You've heard him talk about the Taylor Rooks interview from a year or so ago. The famous, being the anchor and realizing you're drowning line. It's not like Ja hasn't had these conversations. No one is trying to excuse the behavior that Ja Morant did. Holding up a gun in a video is reckless. It's dangerous, like Adam Silver said in his press release talking about the suspension. I agree with all of that. But I'd rather the franchise player not be posted up at a strip club with $50,000 on the ground on Instagram Live at 3 a.m. That's what I would rather not happen. But it's not my life. It's his life. He's a 23-year-old multimillionaire. We live very different lives. So I'm not going to judge someone else's mental struggles and how they try to cope with them, regardless of how cool it seems to get jokes off. He has admitted that he needed help, and that's why he went to the facility that he went to. Now, the important thing for Ja, and from some of the quotes that we've gotten from the Jalen Rose interview on ESPN, which, by the way, very glad it was Jalen Rose. I thought he had the best response to the Morant issue of anybody from the national media in terms of how he interacted with the news on the NBA on ESPN broadcasts. So I'm glad it was Jalen Rose that did the sit down with Ja. It comes down to action now for Ja Morant. He has to show that this experience has changed his perspective. He says that he knows he has things to lose now. And as crazy as that is to say out loud, with a Nike shoe and Powerade athlete sponsorship and the $191 million, there's a very real possibility that Ja Morant just cost himself the All-NBA team. And that, in a roundabout way, will cost him roughly $40 million on his next contract, because you have to have 2 All-NBA selections to get that Supermax deal. So he might go and have $191 million, which is still a heck of a lot of money, but it could have been well over $200 million because there's so many other good guards in the NBA. And Ja Morant was one of the top 6 before all this happened. But it's fair to argue, after missing this time and this key moment for the season for the Grizzlies, will he still be in that mix? I'm not sure. It's an interesting question. It comes down to action now. You very well may have lost millions of dollars because of these choices. You very well put yourself, forget NBA basketball danger, real world danger. Real world danger. I'm not going to make the connection to Memphis, Tennessee and gun violence issues, but there is a reality and a truth when you hear multiple people say putting a gun in a video like that can attract the wrong kind of attention. So enough people that have been in those situations have said that, including Jalen Rose, that carries weight. So it was reckless, it was careless, borderline dangerous, or pretty dangerous, to be honest with you. And certainly not becoming of a guy who is primed, as Bomani Jones and others have said, to be the face of American basketball in the years to come. Who is in a better position than him? Not Trae Young, not Anthony Edwards. Those are good basketball players, but in terms of the size and scope of the cultural impact that is potentially possible, there's a reason why Nike and Powerade and all these other companies are coming and knocking at Ja Morant's door. He's the one that has that Allen Iverson-esque it factor, the ability to impact not just the sport on the floor, but the culture of the game off of it. He has that. And he most certainly can lose it. Like I've said before, the NBA is going to carry on with or without Ja Morant. The Memphis Grizzlies will continue to exist with or without Ja Morant. It is up to Ja to be the leader that he is capable of being. But more importantly, beyond being the basketball leader that he's capable of being, to be the man that he's capable of being for his daughter, for his family. There are a lot of good things in that interview, and I highly recommend it. Aired on SportsCenter with Scott Van Pelt. Obviously, it'll be all over social media, I'm sure, in the days to come. Go and check it out. It's well worth a listen. Morant said all the right things, but talk is cheap. It's about action. And we can talk more about Morant's basketball return on the floor on subsequent episodes of Locked On Grizzlies. That'll be a good thing to have my partner, DeMichael Cole, with me on. But I want to reiterate that I hope Ja Morant, the person, is well. Because eventually the lights will be gone and the money won't be flowing as freely. And you're there with you and your daughter and your family. You have to be able to answer for the life you live. And if you're happy living that life, I hope Ja has found some peace, and that will lead to him getting back to what he says he loves to do, and that's play basketball. Speaking of basketball, we're going to talk about the actual on-the-court product for the Memphis Grizzlies, or lack thereof, at least defensively, against the Miami Heat next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. Have you ever dreamed of being an NBA GM and managing your basketball franchise? Well, your dream can come true, and this game, Ultimate Pro Basketball GM, is definitely for you. You can manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through the season, lead your team to glory. You're going to be responsible for hiring coaches, making draft picks, trades, training your players, and navigating your franchise through free agency and the draft. All this in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Pro Basketball GM is completely free and playable offline. You can play on the go as you want and when you want to. You should definitely get some friends together. The Locked On NBA DMs on Twitter have been talking about how addicting this game is. You should be checking it out as well. Locked On Grizzlies listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On in the game store. So make sure to check it out. To download the game, just visit probasketballgm.com, scan the code, or look it up on the app stores. That's probasketballgm.com. Ultimate Basketball GM. Start your dynasty today. We're talking Grizzlies Heat and how the Grizzlies defense surprisingly didn't show against Miami. Next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host, Joe Mullinax, once again flying solo on this particular episode to Michael Cole, focused on the Ja Morant news that broke doing his work at the Commercial Appeal as the Grizzlies beat writer. I got it today. We'll have DeMichael back with us on Friday and take a look at a busy weekend for the Memphis Grizzlies ahead. But before we get to all that, we got to talk about this Miami Heat game. And there's a couple players in particular that I'm going to save for the final segment of this show, because there's been debates on Twitter, Grizzlies Twitter, and others have been very animated about these two particular players and who should play and who shouldn't and why one guy gets run. And I'm going to squash it. I'm just going to completely destroy it. That's my goal, at least, in the final segment. But I do want to talk about the overall game against the Miami Heat because there were reasons for optimism. Jaren Jackson Jr., even though the Grizzlies had one of their worst defensive performances of the entire season, I mean, it was not good. I got to tell you, the Miami Heat just cooked 60% almost, 59.8% from the field for the Miami Heat, almost 45% from three, 82% almost conversion rate on free throws on 33 attempts. That is 27 for 33 from the free throw line. The Grizzlies were 9 for 14. So the Heat made almost twice as many free throws as the Grizzlies attempted. It's going to be really difficult to win games like that. And the Grizzlies, who held tough in the first quarter, it was 29-27 at the end of one, got completely obliterated in the second and third quarters. And the third quarter, if you've been paying attention this season, is particularly surprising because Memphis has been one of the very best third quarter teams in the entire National Basketball Association. Not in this one. Not in this game. That was not the case. The Miami Heat came out guns a-blazing and put the boots to Memphis. Between the second and third quarters, the Miami Heat outscored the Grizzlies by 26 points. It was a 28-point game entering the final frame. And while Memphis outscored the Heat by 9 in the fourth, the game was already over. The Grizzlies essentially punted the fourth quarter. You saw Kenneth Lofton Jr. for the entire fourth quarter, basically. So yes and no, right? There were good things. There were not so good things in the game. And it was bad. It was bad enough to empty the bench, knowing how many games the Grizzlies have coming up. Again, Friday, Saturday, and Monday, 3 games in 4 nights. Made sense to not keep the starters out there. But Jaren Jackson Jr. was a major positive. And even though his defensive numbers, again, the Heat were excellent on the offensive end. And Jaren Jackson Jr. had one of the team's worst plus-minus numbers, actually the worst. He and Tyus Jones had minus 23. So it wasn't a good night for Jaren on the defensive end. The Heat were able to get their shots and get what they wanted, but he still made impacts there. 1 block, 2 steals. It's not like he was a complete abysmal player. It wasn't just his fault. that the Heat got hot offensively. But let's look at the offensive production from Jaren for a second. 25 points on 15 shots. Jaren shot 67% from the field, 4 for 7 from 3, over 50%. 9 rebounds. What has been one of the major critiques of Jaren Jackson Jr. his entire Grizzlies career? He doesn't know how to rebound. He's not good enough at rebounding. Well, here's a game where Jaren Jackson Jr. got after it on the glass. He was the Grizzlies' leading rebounder. And believe it or not, he was the leading rebounder in a game that included Kevin Love, that included Bam Adebayo. It was Jaren Jackson Jr. that led the way on the glass. So a really good showing. And it wasn't just the numbers. If you watch the game, or maybe if you missed it, I'll try to give you a little play-by-play here. Jaren rips the ball from Kevin Love on one possession. He goes coast to coast, his own dribble, his own handle, from one end of the basket, one end of the floor to the other. He dishes out into the corner that initiates a system of swing passes all the way to the open Tyus Jones on the other end of the floor where Jaren started with the ball to make a three. So tertiary, in a roundabout way, facilitation of offense. We talked in the past, or at least I have, about wanting to see Jaren be a more willing and able passer. The ability to handle in the open court in transition. The strength and the physical wherewithal to take the ball from Kevin Love, who's not what he used to be, but is still a good basketball player. A really solid showing from Jaren Jackson Jr. You could argue one of his best offensive games. Again, defensively, the Grizzlies just really struggled in this one. You got to give the Heat credit. Again, the free throws are a major example of that. They're able to get to the basket at will. Really a strong showing from the Miami Heat. Before the game, I did the quick recap for Bluff City Media. By the way, bluffcitymedia.co. Make sure you're going over there, subscribing. You get a 10-day free trial. Obviously, March Madness is starting. There's all sorts of reasons to check out our Grizzlies coverage, our Tigers coverage. If you want to do an annual subscription, you can get 10% off right now using the promo code Mullinax, bluffcitymedia.co/join. Give us a shot. But I did the recap over at Bluff City Media, and I talked about how it really was remarkable to see the Heat find ways to score the basketball the way they did. Because Jimmy Butler had 23 points. Excuse me. Excuse me again. But Tyler Hero had 24. Bam Adebayo had 26. You had guys like Max Strus come off the bench and get 12. Caleb Martin had 11. They spread the scoring out. They actually had 7 guys in double figures. The Grizzlies had 6, but again, the high scorer was Jaren at 25. The next closest guy was the next closest guy was Luke Kennard, who I broke. That's one of the guys I'm going to talk about. Spoiler alert at the end of the show here. But he was the next leading scorer at 14, and Kennard got a majority of his scoring, if not all of the scoring, in the fourth quarter when the game was already put away. There's reason for that, and people are going to talk about the officiating, and it wasn't great. It wasn't a well-officiated game. That's not why Memphis lost. The Miami Heat outplayed the Grizzlies. I think that's a fair thing to say. But Desmond Bane being ejected for a foul that was committed by Kevin Love that initiated the arm contact that forced Desmond Bane to hit Kevin Love in the man region, in the crotch, in the groin, however you want to say it. He gets a flagrant 2 and gets ejected because of that. For contact and punch to the groin that Bane didn't mean to do because they missed a foul. Again, the Heat have had success. Shout out to Pete Pranica, the Grizzlies play-by-play television voice. He pointed out at halftime that the Heat have been winning games like this. This was not a fluke. This wasn't one bad game of officiating. Miami is getting to the line. They're finding ways to create contact. They're finding ways to get points, and they're having success with it. So this is, again, kudos to the Heat. But even with that in mind, it was a poorly officiated game. Another positive coming out of it was Zaire Williams showing some confidence. He scored 12 points in the game. Again, it was all in garbage time. He didn't play at all until the fourth quarter. But still, the Miami Heat played their starters for a while. That's important to point out. Like, Bam Adebayo had 33 minutes. Tyler Hero had 34 minutes. Like, these guys still logged some time against the reserves of the Memphis Grizzlies. And, Zaire Williams was out there on the floor going against some of these dudes, and he was showing what he's physically capable of. And that was really good to see. He had a little more swagger, a little bit more confidence to his game. Hopefully that continues to carry on, because he seemed very disheveled and very, broken in terms of his confidence throughout the multiple parts of this season. So Zaire had a good showing. Jaren had a good showing. The defense was not good. The Heat deserve credit. They got the win. But this is one of those games that you watch the tape. Where did we overhelp? Where did we miss some rotations? Then you flush it, because the Grizzlies are about to get really busy, which we'll talk more about on Friday's show. Next on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, though, I'm going to talk about two players in particular. Like I said, I already dropped one of their names. It doesn't make sense. I am struggling with the logic of it. I'll talk about it next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, March Madness is here. The Built March Madness bracket is here. We know you have a favorite bar or puff, and now it's your time to make it count. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Built Bar. You need to go to BuiltMarchMadness.com to vote for your favorites. I'm voting for the coconut almond bar. That's my favorite. And if you want the Grizzlies to win, then you'll be voting for that bar too. Support your team, support your bar or puff. And when you vote for your favorite bar or puff, you will be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners get a free box of Built. Not only that, but one Locked On fan will win a 12-month subscription to Built to have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to your door. You got to try Built. It's the best protein bar. Amazing, 100% real chocolate, high in protein, low in sugar. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. So run to BuiltMarchMadness.com right now to vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March, so hop in and support your pick. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is also brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is the best way for you to embrace the race to the finish that is the grind of the NBA season. It's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. New customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet does not win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. Safe, secure, super easy to use. And you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores, threes drained, and almost just about everything in between. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So maybe you want to take the over in Grizzlies Spurs on Friday. You think Memphis will cover the spread. You can combine those bets and others to get a chance at a better payout. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. I am going to be hard on John Konchar, which if you have been watching this show, you're well aware of my propensity to do that. Right? I have a tendency. People maybe would say I have it out for John Konchar, and I don't. I just want the Memphis Grizzlies to play their best basketball players. And John Konchar is not one of their best basketball players. He's not. He's not. Now, you, dear listener, dear viewer of Locked On Grizzlies, you might say, Joe, you talk about numbers sometimes. You don't talk about numbers as much as other guys, but you use it to, twist your agenda and make your points. I'm not sure why I'm subscribing that voice to you. I apologize for that. Well, look at the numbers. John Konchar has amazing numbers. He really racks up the numbers. Advanced analytics do love John Konchar. You're not wrong. But it depends on the number that you're using and why those numbers say that Konchar is as good as he is. Because so much of Konchar's run in terms of building up that base of numbers was when he was playing with the starters, when he was logging time with John Morant and Dylan Brooks and Steven Adams and Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. Konchar, I have said this numerous times, Konchar is a perfect end of bench player. I don't mind the extension that John Konchar signed, as long as he is viewed as an end of the rotation player, end of the bench player. He's a break in case of emergency kind of guy. He has a very malleable game. He can camp out in the corner. He can do a little bit off the dribble. He is below average defensively, but he's not bad on that end. And there are times when you're below average, you have better showings. And over the last couple of games, to Konchar's credit, he has done better defensively than, say, Luke Kennard. I think that's fair to say from watching them play. But at some point, you got to score the basketball. And in 22 minutes of play, and Conchar didn't play a ton in the fourth quarter, he got a lot of this run with the better Grizzlies players. In 22 minutes of play, John Conchar was 1 for 5 from the field, 1 for 4 from beyond the arc against the Miami Heat. 4 rebounds, not bad. 4 assists, even better. He has a game that is malleable. It fits with a lot of different guys, which is why he's a great guy. When you have to play him, he's going to accentuate and amplify what your good players are able to do and capable of doing. But he has shown that he is not capable in volume to contribute as a scorer. And because of that, he has major issues in terms of how he contributes to this Grizzlies team, in particular in their largest problem, which is half-court offense. You know what helps with half-court offensive issues? Three-point shooting. You know who the Grizzlies have on this team that played fewer minutes than John Conchar against the Miami Heat and yet scored 11 more points? Luke Kennard. Luke Kennard is a member of the Memphis Grizzlies. And I'm not here to act like Luke Kennard is the savior, because he's not. He's a flawed player. There's a reason the Los Angeles Clippers didn't play him as much. He can have some traffic cone tendencies defensively. His lateral quickness is problematic. He is a little overly generous with the basketball. There'll be times where he'll make one too many passes. All those things are fair and true. But there's been lots of evidence, not just in Memphis. There's been less evidence because he hasn't been given the chance. But when he was in Detroit, Luke Kennard can be a secondary facilitator of offense. He has shown the ability to do that. And he didn't just freaking forget how to do that. He still has that capacity. He needs to be given the opportunity to do it. And at times, he has that opportunity, and wouldn't you know it, assists happen. Good things happen. Not always, but often enough that I'd like to see more. And again, Luke Kennard coming to the Memphis Grizzlies was 52% on corner threes. 52%. And for whatever reason, even when Taylor Jenkins has him camped out in the corner, which he shouldn't be doing, he should be diversifying, the different things that Luke Kennard does, coming off of screens, getting him more looks because he shoots so well from three. He was 4 for 5 in this game. Instead of that, he's camped out in the corner, and even when he's wide open, for whatever reason, his teammates aren't making the pass. I don't know if Luke Kennard said something to somebody. I don't know if maybe he's not understanding scheme well enough. There were instances in the first half where it looked like he and Santi Aldama both were guilty of overhelping on various possessions, and that led to better Miami Heat shot chances. I want to stress, Luke Kennard is flawed. He is not a perfect basketball player. You can make an argument against him. I'm just saying I don't care, because the argument for him is he has an elite NBA basketball skill. He is a three-point shooter. He is someone that your perimeter defender, whoever is on him, has to honor as a threat. And when you are a team that is so dependent on attacking the paint and getting to the rim and trying to score in that manner, you need to create as much space as possible for the John Morant when he returns. Tyus Jones and his floater. Jaren Jackson Jr., dribble penetration. He's doing better with his back to the basket, but he still likes to create off the dribble. Desmond Bane, full head of steam, getting downhill like we talked about with DeMichael yesterday. That is how the Grizzlies cook offensively. And you need more room to operate to do that. You know who provides that? Luke Kennard, much more so than John Conchar. So I know that DeMichael has talked in the world. They have to honor Kennard they have to honor Conchar because he's shown that he can make the three. When recently has he made a volume of threes? When? Give me the number. You know what? I'll give you the number because it's going to be super easy to find because it's not that big. All right? You can't tell me that it makes more sense to play John Conchar than it does to play Luke Kennard when the Grizzlies' offense in the half court struggles so much. You can't say that. It can't happen because it's not true. John Conchar can't give Memphis what they need him to give. Last time Luke Kennard scored 4 3-point buckets in a game, he made 5, to his credit, against Oklahoma City in November. That was the last time he made 4 or more threes in a game. The last time. Luke Kennard made 4 threes in one game against the Miami Heat. Conchar made 1 against Miami, 0 against Dallas, 0 against Dallas again, 2 against Golden State, so we're up to 3 now, 0 against the Lakers, 1 against the Clippers. So it has taken Conchar 6 games to make the amount of threes that Luke Kennard made in 1 quarter of basketball. Stop playing John Conchar more than Luke Kennard. It doesn't make sense, especially when the defense is struggling anyway. If your best argument is Conchar is a better defender than Kennard, even if that's true, which I would like to have the debate that it's not. But even if you want to say that it's true because Kennard has issues, again, he does. The Grizzlies defense had issues, period, against the Heat. You needed to score. Conchar's not giving you that. Kennard is. So hopefully they find ways to get him more involved in these games coming up, because that was really disappointing to see that. Again, I like John Conchar as an end of rotation, end of bench, break in case of emergency guy, not someone that is your 6th man, one of your first subs coming off the bench. That just doesn't make sense to me. I don't think it ever will. Thanks for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen today. Now make your second listen Game to Game NBA. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Tomorrow, Friday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. DeMichael and I will be back together. We'll preview Grizzlies Spurs, Grizzlies Warriors, a back-to-back for the weekend, Friday, Saturday, back-to-back. I'm sure DeMichael will want to share some thoughts on Ja Morant, a little bit more detail on the interview and the plan perhaps for Ja's return on Monday. Remember, he's going to return to the team. In terms of the team facility, he can practice again. He's not going to play against the Mavericks on that Monday. Wednesday or Friday against the Rockets seems to be a more realistic goal going into next week. So still a week away probably from a return of Ja Morant, but at least there's an end game now. There's an end date. There's an end in sight. And like I said to start the show, most importantly, Ja Morant, the person, needs to be okay, because that's the guy that he has to live with the rest of his life. The Grizzlies will move on without Ja Morant if it came to that. They don't want to, trust me. That's why they're doing all the things they're doing. They want Ja Morant to be a part of the puzzle. But the Grizzlies would exist without Ja Morant. Ja Morant would obviously still be living, and we want him to be as healthy and mentally prepared as possible to live that life as best he can. I'm sure DeMichael will have some insights on that. So we'll talk Ja. We'll talk the busy weekend for Memphis coming up on Friday's episode. Make sure you're joining us. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, free and available wherever you get your podcasts as part of the Locked On Podcast Network. You can also subscribe, rate, review, not just on podcast channels, but also on YouTube. You can like, comment, continue to help us make Locked On Grizzlies a better show and a bigger part of your NBA media consumption. So until Friday, enjoy your Thursday, rest, relax, do a little bit of work, but also enjoy a little bit of play. And we will see you to start your weekend next time we're together. Until then, stay locked in. I'm Joe Mullinax. This is Locked On Grizzlies.